Here today we're going to be talking about environmental chemistry, topic 1 in your science focus textbook. This is for Science 9 students, and today's subject is going to be organic substances. So what we're going to be talking about here is what are organic substances, how do they enter plants, how do they enter animals, how do they enter us, and just a brief description of what they are in terms of elements. And so we're connecting back to the periodic table of elements, and we're going to understand how some of these, what are nutrients, how do they move through our system a little bit, or at least how do they enter our system. So moving on, so what happens when we ingest? Well, what does this word ingest mean right here? What does that mean? Well, that's when we consume them, that's when we eat them. So what happens to the nutrients that we ingest along the way? So what happens is in our body is we have this process called digestion. So we have our digestive system. Our cells work together to form tissues, and then multiple tissues form organs, and then our organs are the basis of functioning in our organ system. So our digestive system, obviously we have an esophagus, we have a stomach, we have a small intestine, large intestine, and so what happens is we actually take these nutrients in, we chew up the food, we break them down, and we break down the chemicals that are present in the food. And what happens is the molecules that we break down, they're small and they're soluble, and soluble means that we're able to transport them in and out of a permeable or semi-permeable membrane. So they pass through these membranes in our villi, in our small intestine, and they're actually transported into our circulatory system, so into our bloodstream through our capillaries, which are single-walled, thin, semi-permeable blood vessels. So these chemicals and nutrients, then what happens is they're carried throughout our body to our cells, and we need these to move, grow, think, to repair. So their function is, if we look down here, the function of the nutrients in our bloodstream is actually to provide us with energy, to help us to grow, to build our body, and to repair cells. So the nutrients that we take in that are actually transported into our bloodstream from our digestive system are actually sent to cells, and our cells can repair themselves, they can grow, and so on and so forth. So chemicals in our bodies, okay, our body needs about 25 different chemicals for normal growth. So what happens is we have this complex organization of both what we call organic compounds and inorganic compounds. So what are organic compounds? And that's the main focus today. We'll touch base a little bit on inorganic, but what are they? Well, the key here is that they contain carbon. Okay, so take a look here. I'd like you to pause the video, go back. I want you to be taking notes on this screencast so that you have these for reference in your notes for study purposes and such. And so I want you to make sure that you're always taking notes on these screencasts and jotting down key points, making sure that this information, for you note takers, you take it down, and for you people that or individuals that don't really necessarily like notes or like creating notes, at least you jot down key points so that you can or you rewatch videos so you can jot down key points to build your understanding on the topic. So anyways, organic compounds contain carbon, okay, and that's going to be important. And they also are going to be mostly comprised of things like or elements such as oxygen and hydrogen. Now notice that all these are nonmetals, and we're forming a molecular compound or organic compound. So substances that do not contain carbon, we're going to call inorganic. So do not, really important. So if they contain carbon, we're going to call them organic compounds, and if they do not contain, we're going to call them inorganic. So the organic nutrients, which primarily form green plants, they're going to be classified into 4 major groups, and we will talk about that next. Or we'll be talking about that throughout the screencast. But why are organic molecules, and our focus is on organic molecules, why are organic molecules important? Okay, so what are they? Well, like I said previously, they're anything that contains this element carbon. Okay, so it's a non-metal carbon. Okay, so they're going to form, we have some three main that we're going to talk about. One is carbohydrates, two is lipids, and three is proteins. Now carbohydrates, so if you take a look at glucose here, we've discussed glucose a little bit, and we use that especially if you talk about plants use that through the process of photosynthesis. But these are sugars, starches, cellulose in plants. So things like, so we can look at pastas, rice, potatoes, fruits, and bread. Okay, and what we typically do is we take the plants actually absorb the nutrients as much as they can, and then they're passed on through bioaccumulation, because animals will eat those organic or those organic molecules, and they'll accumulate within them, and so the number increases as they primarily eat those plants. Then they build that bioaccumulation in their system. But that which can also be talked about with pesticides and how they're transferred throughout the food web. But what happens is plants consume them, and then after the plants, animals consume the plants, and then we consume the animals. So we keep passing these organic molecules on, and then eventually that's how we get it in our body, and we use it and transport them to our cells. So the second that we talk about right here is lipids. Okay, so these are fats and oils composed of many carbons. And remember, organic compound or molecules are going to contain carbon, which is really important. So our body stores fats. Plants produce canola seeds, corn, peanuts, soybeans, walnuts, cashews, and they're all high in fat. Okay, and our body stores those fats. So plants are the producers, and then we end up consuming them. And along the way, we can consume these plants ourselves, or we can consume other animals that consume these plants. And then we can that's one way we can ingest, and we can take it into our body, these organic molecules. And the third we'll talk about is protein. So this is things such as fish, meat, eggs, and dairy products. So we think about the Canada Food or the Canada Food Guide. How many carbohydrates do we need to consume? How many fats and lipids do we consume? How many proteins? And so where are we getting all the nutrients we need for us to properly function, to help our cells grow and build, and to help just basically us to move and have energy and produce that energy. So we need these three things: carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins. So these are the important organic molecules that you'll want to remember. So again, please take notes on this material, and play, pause, rewind if you need to go back. So types of organic nutrients. So you're probably wondering, well, we have these organic nutrients, what are they? Well, carbohydrates, and we just briefly touched about that, they're an energy source for metabolism. So that is what we burn off as energy. Okay, so they're made up of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. So things like glucose, for example, with C6H12, C6H12O6. Okay, that's so we can find these things in rice, grain, potatoes, fruits. These are going to give us a good source of energy. Whereas if we go down here to proteins, this is the structural molecular molecule for body that helps chemical reactions. This is going to help a chemical reaction, but these are your muscle builders, your proteins. Okay, so if they say you want to bulk up, say in terms of fitness, I know a lot of you are athletes, you're going to want to make sure you're putting lean proteins in your system. So what they are is they're made up of amino acids. Okay, and each protein has its own unique combination and arrangement of these amino acids. So they're made up of amino acids, and they are structural molecules for your body, and they actually help chemical reactions. So like I said, things like meat, eggs, dairy products, legumes, and nuts. Then we go down to the lipids. Okay, so that's the storage of unused chemical energy. So they're composed of many carbons, hydrogen, and oxygen atoms as well. And remember, carbon being the key to organic compounds. How do I distinguish between a organic molecule and an inorganic? Well, I have to actually look at, does it contain carbon? Contains carbon, it is a organic nutrient. Okay, so these are things like vegetables, nuts, and we've talked about that already. So this chart would be important to copy down as well for you. And make sure you have a sheet of paper when you're watching this. So how do we take? So the last thing we're going to say is how, or discuss, is how do we take in these organic molecules into our body? So that word ingest I used at the start. How do we take these in? So the main process is diffusion, and remember, diffusion is moving from a high concentration right here to a low concentration. So if I have a high concentration right here, and then I have a membrane right here, okay, but it's semi-permeable, so I'll just dot a line just to show that it's semi-permeable. Some things are going to go through, and over here on the other side in diffusion I have a lower concentration. We're going to see the movement through this semi-permeable membrane of these nutrients from high concentration over to the low concentration area. So that's what diffusion is. We're moving from high concentration areas to low concentration. So it is natural and it doesn't require energy. So these things occur in our body all the time. It also occurs in plants, diffusion and osmosis. And the next one we'll talk osmosis. But diffusion happens. We diffuse the nutrients from our intestines, the villi and our small intestines, and we actually diffuse the nutrients into, and they're absorbed into our circulatory system and our bloodstream. So when we eat, how do we get the nutrients? Well, they're diffused through through our small intestine into our bloodstream, and then they're sent to cells. Second way is through osmosis, which I touched base on. So osmosis in the body, also osmosis in plants. So this is the movement of water across a semi-permeable membrane. Now remember, semi-permeable membranes mean they allow some things through and some things they don't allow through. If I was to say permeable, that means everything's allowed through, and if I was to say impermeable, that means nothing is allowed through. So these are semi-permeable, meaning it lets some things in and it doesn't allow some things in. So an example of this is water absorption in plants. So it moves through the cell walls of the roots by osmosis from high to low concentration. So we see the process of diffusion actually occurring within osmosis. So say for example I had roots like this down here. Okay, I have all these roots. These are terrible looking roots, but they go up to a stem. And on these roots they have little root hairs. Tiny little root hairs down here, and they actually increase the surface area for absorption. But what's going to happen is they are going to absorb nutrients and water, and it's actually through osmosis. It's going to enter through here, in through the roots, and it's going to move its way up through the stem, through what we call active transport, which we'll talk about next. But what's going to happen is osmosis allows it to come in. Okay, so this osmosis here actually allows water and nutrients to enter into the plant through the root hairs, and it moves up the stem, and these water molecules actually push because there's low pressure in the leaves and there's high pressure down near the roots in terms of concentration, so it creates upward movement all the way up, and it circulates throughout the plant through the different tissues, the xylem tissue and the phloem tissue. Okay, so we have osmosis, we have diffusion. This is ways we can ingest and we can take in organic molecules. And the last is called active transport, as I had mentioned before. And active transport is actually the last way we're going to take these, or living organisms can take in organic molecules. So it requires energy, and that's why it's called active. So it requires a small amount of energy and to produce more energy. So an example is moving from low concentration to high concentration, which is backwards opposite. So that's the opposite of diffusion. Okay, where diffusion actually moves from high concentration to low, we're moving from low concentration to high, and it requires energy to do so because you have to kick in that extra energy to move from low concentration. Okay, so an example is plants need lots of nutrients. We may need to get more nutrients into the cell even if they are already in there. So it's opposite of diffusion I've put here. So these plants require lots of nutrients, so they need to absorb as many nutrients as they can. So they take some in through diffusion and osmosis in the roots, and we have to make sure they get to the various cells. So they're actively transported from low concentration areas to high concentration areas so that we can actually move these nutrients around through the plant and we can evenly distribute them. Okay, and even though there's nutrients into a cell, we still have to be moving them around so that we can take all the nutrients we can and we can move them to the various components and parts of the plant, into the different tissues, and make sure the different cells that work together to build tissues actually get the nutrients they need. Okay, so 3 ways we can move them: diffusion, osmosis, and active transport. The main thing I want you to understand here is what are some examples of organic molecules, so carbohydrates, proteins, and lipids. Okay, how do we ingest them? How do we move them through our body? Well, we ingest them through our digestive system. We absorb them. They're absorbed from our villi into our circulatory system, our blood vessels, through capillaries, and they're transported to the cells after they've been broken down. Okay, so that's organic molecules. I hope this has helped. If you haven't taken notes on this, I'd like you to go back and jot down the notes. Make sure you have them for your own study purpose in your binders. And I would really like you to read topic 1 in your textbook to help you better understand these components of organic molecules. And the next screencast is going to discuss inorganic molecules and how we can actually break them down to form organic molecules within our body. Okay, thanks for tuning in, guys. Appreciate it. See you.